Part 2, Chapter 1, Pieces. I've always been opposed to looking at myself naked for a lot of immature reasons. Insults by others given power and privacy, ashamed for things completely normal. A little bit of belly pudge, a freckle on my left rib cage, persistent clusters of acne on my shoulders, and even my breast size. Stupid, human things I've been tearing down since the first time I stripped in the locker room at school. I remember only one or two girls laughing at my underwear color, blue, a boy's color. I didn't let that bother me, but their itty-titty comments at the time and then the dog nickname Stacy proclaimed. I don't even know how she got there, but it stuck. I carried their mockery every day like required clothing and used their voices as a catalyst to dissuade me from swimming without a t-shirt on or even looking at my reflection before getting in the shower. Or at least anything below the neck. Now, I stood before the broken, reflective glass, completely nude and soaked through with my father's blood. It painted my face, starting just below my eyes and drooling down to my neck and collarbones. Red blots from the slash stuck in my hair and my eyebrows, sticky like syrup and sickening to look at. I shuddered, hollow putrid heat writhing in my muscles. Distant whispers caressed my ears, seeping through the floor and ceiling vent. His frightened voice called to me from the bedroom below, an airy whisper, desperate in pain. I ignored everything apart from what I saw. Me. Just me. My eyes were vacant and dilated. The edges of my vision blurred and darkened, becoming more distorted the longer I went without blinking. I couldn't distance myself from the gunshot to my shoulder. That piercing ring haunted me even 30 minutes later. I don't remember coming up here or taking my clothes off. A shy glance to the left noticed a plastic trash bag with my clothes poking out of the top. All the deep red blood now mostly dried and rotting. I could smell the metallic aura, the emotions trapped in woven fabric, never to be released or truly felt again. A small pale circle of scar tissue replaced the gunshot wound I sustained. No lasting internal damage or soreness, something I couldn't fathom in the slightest. The old cut on my chin and bruises I hid all over were gone as well, barely a cat scratch on my face. Most concerning of all was the fact that my lips were bare and unstitched. How is any of this possible? I wondered. My arm moved like a puppet, each creak of my joints echoing in this small space. I turned the faucet on, but couldn't hear the water splash. The nearby rag was dropped under the stream and saturated quickly, though I didn't stop the flow. I let it run for minutes, blissfully uncaring about the propane and water bill. It ran and ran, vomiting warming liquid until faint steam rose from the yellowed porcelain. The mirror started to fog, and I took the rag in my hand. It was hot enough to burn, but I barely felt its heat. A voice within. Washing the blood won't remove the true stain. I said nothing. Carefully, I brought the hot rag to my face and worked my way down, collecting extracted life until the rag changed color, then I wrung it out. The water remained silent to me. Her heavy breathing took its place. She sounded mad. You know, something's bothering me. How did you push me aside to speak to your dad? You shouldn't be able to do that. The rag grew wet again, and I wiped myself clean. Inch by inch, my own skin turned red with the harsh scrape and heat. By the time I reached my collarbone, the water had gone ice cold. I kept wringing it out and wiping, ignoring her chiding words until every blasphemous stain was removed. Staring now, nude and painfully human, I blinked hard and began to revive. The washcloth was added to the bag. Then I tied the top off and took it in my unfeeling grasp. I carried it out of the bathroom and into the dark, submerged in desolate silence and truly feeling the crushing weight of isolation. Every step down the stairs was heavier than the last. My knees buckled, and I had to brace myself on the railing once or twice. When I reached the living room, I kept my back to his open bedroom door. The pressure I felt emanating from the dark, it knew my name and all my secrets, ones I didn't even know, and it whispered them back to me. Disembodied voices, clouds of transparent mass, and random blips of color occupy the negative space all around me. They've always been there, just outside of my perception. I don't know how I knew that. At the same time, they were entirely of my own making. Nothing was real, in the same way that everything is real. Next thing I knew, I was digging a hole. I raised my head, out of breath and swallowing humid air. I've always heard that if the forest goes quiet, you should leave immediately. It means there's a predator around, hunting. Right now, the forest held its breath, and I wasn't afraid. Engulfed by a sheet of black, alone and completely vulnerable, I dug into the dirt with nothing but my hands. The demon whispered, "Do you sense that? The fear nature exudes for you. It understands you better than yourself, exactly what you have become, and it waits for you to strike." I wanted to shut my eyes, but even in the fraction of a blink, I could see my father's face. I kept my head low and listened to the scrape of my nails against dirt and rocks. The piles to my left and right grew larger and larger until the bag would fit. Shoulders sore, I began pushing the mounds of cold soil over the black plastic, packing it in tightly until only a discolored patch remained. I spent the next few minutes gathering sticks and brush from the surrounding forest, never wandering too far, else I might not stop walking. I stared only at my feet, because the one time I looked up into the belly of the woods, I saw shadows behind every tree. People, wavering in place, made of contained smoke, eyes glowing purple and red, watching me closely. At last, an impatient wind brushed along loose leaves on the forest floor. The kiss of the invisible current coated my flesh in goosebumps. I returned to the freshly refilled hole and made it appear as inconspicuous as I could. I started to get dizzy and sat down by the miniature grave, knees up and chin resting on top. I thought about where I was mere hours ago, sitting at the dinner table of a new friend and laughing. Now, I'm sitting in the woods with my father dead in his room, a murderer. "How?" I mumbled. "How did this happen?" The demon shivered. "Your broken little voice gives me life. Are you gonna cry? That would be wonderful." My words started as a trickle, an attempt at friendly communication despite her taunting. "I didn't know by power he meant giving me something intelligent. Did you think he would just imbue you with magic?" She laughed condescendingly. My eyes eased halfway shut, and I focused on a car horn in the distance. The tremble in my bones started again, and I felt myself reverting to trauma. "I didn't want to kill him. I just wanted him to stop treating me that way. What was the point?" Her voice crackled. "You can try calling it fate, if that makes you feel more important." "I don't know what to call any of this. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do now." "You didn't think of the next step after murdering your daddy? You naive brat." I winced at the static bursting from her presence. "Of course not." My voice was hushed. "But it's like I could only watch as everything collapsed around me." She chittered. "The first is always the hardest, kid. By the time we tear our way through those cunts at school, you'll feel much better about this whole thing. You might even start to enjoy yourself." My eyes opened wide at her declaration. Sick to my stomach, I was presented with a slideshow of flickering faces. Stacy, Joey, Tansu, and all the other people who treated me right and wrong. My tongue soured, and I felt a fire in my chest. "That's not going to happen. No one else is going to die." She laughed out loud, bursting my eardrums and causing me to jolt in place. You think you can stop me? Killing is what you signed up for, and I'm gonna make sure you get your soul's worth of killing. Her last words slipped away, sinking deep into some mental pit in my skull. Suddenly, I felt a lot lighter. I raised my head and looked around, and I could hear pond frogs and crickets. That panging alarm of danger was nothing more than a paranoid tickling between my ears. I slowly got to my feet, exhausted and weak, and began dragging my feet down the little carved path. Approaching my house, I couldn't help but look to his window. I expected to see the light on, or catch a glimpse of a bluish gray flashing from the television in the living room. Maybe his headlights would stream through the forest as he arrived home earlier than I expected, and he was going to find me outside when I shouldn't be. An earful to be expected. But no. What I saw was a dead house with no lights or colors. The sky peeking over the rooftop was dark and speckled with white stars, the moon hidden behind some faintly glowing clouds. Then I noticed something above. On the roof was a vaguely human shape, unlike the shadows I'd been seeing in the forest. I stopped. The moment I recalled all my attention to the inky blur, it was gone. All at once, minor recollections of similar glances assaulted my mind and solidified as real. All the weird dreams, the feelings of eyes watching me, the bulkhead slamming shut, the abrupt sickness. It was all connected. It was always there. But what does it mean? What of all I'd been seeing has any significance to the old man and this demon? How did it relate to my dad? My mom? And I wonder exactly how this would unfold now that I'm a cognizant piece on the board. A blissful daydream fluttered around in my head, crystal clear memories of a time so very long ago, or so it seems to me now. I remember it being a Friday, the final period of the day. Anticipation was higher than any other day of the week because the coming weekend introduced the start of winter vacation. However, not everyone was so thrilled to be returning home. At first, it didn't quite stick with me, but I noticed the signs as the day progressed. Something was wrong with Joey. I remember that this was a particularly rough time for me. He did his best to avoid and comfort me at the same time, as per my confusing and contradicting instructions. I caught him in the hallway, all downtrodden and unlike himself. Something sprang to life inside me, some nurturing side that I never showed before. I gently pressured him to talk, but he wouldn't budge. I knew that as soon as we boarded our separate buses, I wouldn't see him for at least a week, so I had to do something. Without any pretext, I asked him to meet me in the gymnasium after school. As expected, he gave no immediate answer. Even still, after the final bell rang and the school emptied of students, I stood alone in the vast bright room and waited. If I remember right, I waited for nearly 15 minutes before he showed up. The door opened with a whisper, and he strolled in, head aimed down at his feet. When I greeted him, the response I got was an echo of my own voice around me. I waited, watching him stand with his hands at his side and his hat pulled over his eyes. I had no choice. With a playful yell, I called his name, followed by a heads up. He lifted his head, and in the same motion, pulled the hat from his vision, just in time to dodge the basketball that I lobbed in his direction. It bounced with an airy spring and dribbled until it hit a nearby wall, rolling back in my direction. We stared at each other, the sorrow clearly visible in his bloodshot eyes. My face was timid. Then I shook off the weight on my shoulders and put on a joyous facade. Taking a few steps to retrieve the ball, I tossed it to him again and said, "Let's play." He caught it this time and held it tight to his chest. Then, with a sensitive smirk, he dribbled once and tossed it back. The energy around us changed and we played for a short time. It wasn't competitive, just friendly attempts at making a basket and the occasional joke between old friends. It was therapeutic. I could see that with each passing handful of minutes that he was loosening up. Whatever plagued him wasn't at the front of his thoughts, which is all I could hope for. But something happened. I don't know how long we played, but he tried to make a shot from the foul line and missed by a mile. The ball hit the court hard and bounced off toward the bleachers. I laughed and made some comment I can't recall, but he just stopped. Standing there with his arms limp by his side, he stared upward towards the ceiling, weeping. It's bizarre to think that memories such as these can find me unprovoked as I wander around in the dark with tragedy a malleable shadow. I stood by the phone now at the divider wall, lost in the snowfall of chaotic calm. His door was at my back, and I faced the open floor of the house, watching memories pass over my vision of simpler times. No audio, barely a visual, just inklings. I touched my lips again, the tender flesh as normal as can be. I kept expecting to feel the binding strings. I waited to be silenced again. I could still feel the tearing, the sting. I blinked now, holding the phone in my hand while an impatient dial tone whined. 3 clicks preceded a low ringing, and I collected the girl I was. 911, please state your emergency. The woman on the other line asked calmly. I exhaled with a staggering breath. Hello? She hesitated for a brief moment. Hello, is everything all right? She asked. No. I visibly shook my head. My dad, A real choke took hold of my throat. I just found him dead in his bedroom. I muttered, my voice weakened. She didn't speak right away, but I could hear a faint tapping over the line. He's dead? How did this happen? Are you safe? She added. As much as my emotions had plateaued, there was still a very real terror clutching to my words. I'm safe. And I don't know, I just got home from a friend's house and he was just lying there. There's so much blood. My jaw trembled. Can you give me your name and address, please? Her voice seemed more invested, hurried. My name is Kimberly Ann Avery, and my house is number 87 on Old Route 43. I explained, exhaustion clear in my voice. Thank you, Kimberly. I'm dispatching paramedics and a couple of officers now. Is there anyone else at home with you? Any neighbors close by? I sighed, acting a little to make my voice sound more fragile than it really was. No, I'm alone. All right. She went briefly quiet. They should be there in roughly 6 minutes. Can you stay on the line with me? She asked sweetly. My brow twitched, and I hung up the phone without a word. Desolation wrapped around my brittle bones once again. I played the scenario in my head. They would investigate and discover multiple stab wounds and his throat cut. The injuries wouldn't match any knife in the house, and I've been out all day. They'll find his gun with 1 shot fired, the tip of the bullet bloody and discarded. Unexplainable. They couldn't possibly link it to me. They'll do everything they can to bring me closure, but will forever be empty-handed. Buzzing, my skull was dense with trauma and fresh knowledge. A pressuring vibration not too dissimilar to what I've known throughout life, yet explicitly different. I understood that the buzz was her, my demon. Her existence as a part of me resonated, aligning with my soul. I could feel her digging. It's hard to explain, but standing here in the dark with little to occupy my mind or senses, her every spiritual movement was broadcast like a faraway blinking light. Every scratch at my walls, every shuffle and skitter. I don't know how any of this works, where she is, or what the construct of my being even looks like. But she was active, and I was aware of it. It had only been 3 minutes since I hung up the phone, but it felt like 30. I moved to the living room and approached every piece of furniture, reliving associated memories new and old, all the while listening to my slowly rising heartbeat and the deafening void. No voices, no whispers, no bubbling. My pacing stopped, and I watched the front door as sirens grew in the distance. 13 seconds passed, and a rapidly flickering blue and red light show blasted through the small gaps between the door and its frame. It begins.